In 1945, I was 4.5 and I was living in Malvern with my grandmother, mother and sister. My father was a navigator in the Halifax bomber that crashed in 1945. His name, Frank Watkin.
So I've never known my father, only by photos. It was my dad, his name was Benjamin O'Neill, and he was a bomb aimer on the Halifax of 640 Squadron that did 26 missions from late 44 into March the 2nd, 45, when the plane crashed and they all were killed.
I know Frank worked with his brother and father in the stock exchange. I don't know much more than that. I didn't know much about him until Trish, my cousin, her father, Frank's brother, Alan, started talking about Frank, giving me letters and photos. So up until then I didn't know a lot about him. As a child, all I knew was that the plane had crashed over Cologne, was shot down over Cologne. That is all I ever knew.
He left for training in 42. I was born in 1940, so I don't even remember seeing him, and I was only 4.5 when he was killed. But at the age of 5 or 6, I do remember being told from my mum that what had happened. It's always been in my mind about not having a father, and I don't have any other friends that have lost their father, so I seem to be out in the even growing up at school. It was always in my mind that I never had a father, and him being in the Air Force, I was aviation inspired right through my whole days with model aeroplanes and knowing what every aeroplane that ever exists.
I've always been interested in airplanes, and I'm more specialized, of course, in the Belgian Air Force. And I write articles on the subject about their history and technical parts of technical articles on that. And when you have a plane that crashes next to your door, what can you do? So I really had to investigate. The first information I get are from my neighbor, who's now 85 years old. He was 10 at the time. He was at school and he witnessed the crash. When I started the project, my first intention was to get in touch with all the families, to have a maximum of information. And then, with the help of my other 2 friends, we started searching on the field to find items in various parts of the aircraft. But what was important was to get in touch with the families and to have information, to have access to the archives. And I wanted to reach all the 7 families. That was my first priority.
My name is Montana Sue Watkin, and I live in the far south coast of New South Wales in a small fishing village near Bermagui.
My name is Ron O'Neill, from Brisbane.
Well, my name is Vincent Picriot. I live in Florifou in Belgium, province of Namur. I'm a translator, but I'm also an aircraft enthusiast, and therefore I was very interested in this particular case.
I remember not having a father in my life. When I first started school, there were some kids, a group of them that just started singing out, "Ha ha ha, you haven't got a father." And I remembered thinking then, like, what a strange thing to do. Like, I didn't feel distressed by it. In those days we would have called that teasing, not bullying, I guess. It didn't really affect me much. I think I took a higher view of it and thought it was more their problem than mine.
Well, from my grandmother, his mother, my grandma, she used to tell me some stories about him growing up and being a great cricket player, or that was his favourite sport. And she even gave me some little medals that he received as a young lad playing cricket competitions and that sort of thing, but I don't know anything very much else about him.
I learned about this Halifax aircraft a few years ago. At first, one of my neighbors had seen the crash of the plane, and he had told me that just behind my house a Flying Fortress had crashed. So I started my investigations, but I thought that it was an American aircraft, a B-17 Flying Fortress, and I couldn't find any information about that crash. In fact, they saw the plane arriving above the hill and then crashed a bit further. So he ran away with some of his friends and went to the site. And then he saw the plane in flames, and but they were not able to get closer. So he just told me that he had seen it happen. And then several days later, he even went into the cockpit, like old kids at the time would do, I think. And that's it. So I let it go for a few years, and then Bernard, another friend who is in the group now, said to me that he had found in the archives of a priest that it was a Halifax aircraft, a British bomber, and that it had crashed on 2 March 1945. And so with all this data, I could start new investigations, and the whole process began. The plane, in fact, didn't really crash. I think it crash landed. And there were American units specialized in getting all the parts of airplanes, like the armament, for instance, as well as the bodies. And one of these units was nearby in another village. And then they came pretty quickly on site, and they closed the site and they evacuated the bodies and then the other pieces which were important. And then I think that the rest of the airplane was taken away, but later. But I have no information on that. There were probably other sources of information, but nothing really concrete to establish where the crash happened. And so even the American archives on that special unit couldn't give me any information on that. So I really had to gather all this information from the service records of the crew members that I got from the RAAF and from the RAF. I began this process by searching the squadron. Fortunately, I was able to get in contact with the author of a book on the squadron, and I found some information, and he also gave me 2 email addresses, and one in Australia and one in Britain. And so I contacted these people. Then I had the help of a genealogist in Australia who managed to find the families of several of the crew members. And then when I finally managed to do that, we said that we could create a memorial and invite them and gather everybody together.
As soon as I got that email from Vincent, I had no idea how I'd be able to get here, but I thought, yeah, I have to go. It just seemed such an amazing thing to do. I just thought, because I didn't remember my father, I didn't expect that any of my kids or grandchildren would have had the same excitement that I started to feel. So that was fantastic when I found out they wanted to come as well, or some of them anyway.
In 2016, my 2 sons and I, we came over to the UK on a mission to, including visiting the grave of my dad, who was buried in Belgium. We only got the email last year. He said it took him 4 years to do this, so at the time that we were over here, he was already started this venture of his to find the descendants of this bomber, and it's just unbelievable. Well, I immediately contacted my son, Brad, who has done a lot of, in the past few years, has done a lot of research and gathered all the information about his wartime activities and all the information from the War Office. regarding correspondence, and I even have his logbook that was given to me by my grandma, and I've had that for many years, so I've always had a reference to what he did, and right through from when he joined to his final mission.
I just thought it was really wonderful that Vincent, someone I didn't know, he didn't know any of the crew members, that he had this passion, it's like his mission, to just, I suppose, bring closure to all the family and make them more aware of what happened.
Getting back to Vincent, I immediately, as I said, talked to Brad about it. So he did a lot of the corresponding backwards and forwards to Vincent. It was just amazing what he was doing, and the fact that, you know, why should someone be doing this? So I just couldn't get over it.
Yes, the memorial was an idea of the various members of our little group. We wanted to have the stone with the names of all the crew members and a plaque next to it that would explain the circumstances of the crash. So the whole thing was the reflection of the whole group. And we wanted to use a stone because it's a stone that you find here in the area, so symbolically there's a link with the village.
Being at the crash site, I think, was probably the most memorable, because just standing there I could feel and sense exactly where it happened, and that was, yeah, it was really special. Sad, of course, but it was just the unveiling of the memorial, the plaque, and the local rock that's only found in that area where they had the plaque. I was just blown away. It was just beautiful. I wasn't expecting the military to be there. 2 men represent from the Australian Embassy and from the UK. That was amazing as well. And they were both lovely, both really nice men.
Bomber Command statistics from World War II are staggering. In total, nearly 365,000 operational sorties were flown, over 1 million tonnes of bombs were dropped, and 8,325 aircraft were lost in action. Of the 125,000 aircrew who flew with Bomber Command, 55,573 lost their lives, a death rate of over 44%. A further 8,403 men were wounded, and 9,838 became prisoners of war. They experienced one of the harshest environments of war, flying often in poor weather against distant targets, cold, fearful, and vulnerable to an enemy they often could not see. As we stand before the headstones of 7 of those airmen, it is possible to imagine the personal cost behind those statistics. Each site marks the resting place of a son, a brother, a husband or a father. It reminds us of the grief and suffering that war besets and the price to be paid for its folly.
Meeting the families from the other crew members was very special as well. One man from the UK, I think it was from the Fielder family. Mrs. Fielder was a woman that her son was the rear gunner, and she had some of the family, some of the crew used to stay with her somewhere, I don't know, in England somewhere. So Mrs. Fielder had written a letter to my mum, Rosalind, and this man brought a letter that Rosalind had written to Mrs. Fielder. It was a relative, I don't know exactly who, maybe his great-grandma or something like that. And it was a letter from my mum to Mrs. Fielder, and this family had hung on to this for 75 years, which is mind-blowing. And also, just that letter, I think I learned more in that short letter about my mum than I had known in the years that I'd known her. She was I think she was traumatised, so that's why she never spoke about, you know, Frank very much.
Well, the big day was a huge success because we were able to show the people what we had found and all these histories.
What I would like to say to Vincent is words don't really cover it, but just how grateful I am, and probably the rest of my family, It was such a fantastic experience, and just to thank him for bringing to light, I suppose, my father's life. I don't know what else to say, really. It was just amazing, and I'm extremely grateful to him. Yeah.
Well, I just can't describe it. It was so thrilling. Yeah, so emotional, as you can see. Well, the scale of what he's done, I didn't expect to have. I thought it was just be a small, just a little group, family, and that was it. But when I saw, you know, what he's done and how he's organised everything, it was just overwhelming.
I think the biggest success, the biggest victory was to be able to gather the families. And when I saw them at the cemetery, it was awesome to see these people just talking together. They even exchanged letters, photographs, and they exchanged the story of their families. And that was extraordinary. To me, that's the best part of the day.